the Duchess of Ashford had destroyed 3 women before her. The first had been a viscount's daughter, pretty, well-mannered, utterly unprepared. 1 season. That was all it took. By the following spring, the girl had married a minor clergyman in Shropshire and was never mentioned in polite company again. The second had been wealthier, a merchant's granddaughter who had somehow clawed her way into the right drawing rooms. The Duchess had smiled at her twice. That was the most dangerous sign, though no one had thought to warn the girl. 6 weeks. That was all it took. The third, well, no one spoke of the third anymore. Vivienne Voss knew none of this when she stepped out of the carriage at Ashford Park on a warm Friday afternoon in June. She knew only that her friend Cecily had insisted, that the invitation had come through Cecily's family, and that she had packed her one good dress and her quietest expectations. She did not know that somewhere inside that grand house, a woman was already watching the drive. She did not know that she had already been identified. She did not know that she would be the 4th, or so everyone assumed. No one had thought to tell Vivienne yet. The house was exactly as impossible as she had imagined. Vivienne stood at the base of the stone steps and looked up at Ashford Park with the particular stillness of someone who has learned not to show what they feel. 3 stories of pale limestone, tall windows reflecting the sky, garden stretching toward a distant tree line in geometric perfection. Somewhere inside those walls, 60 or 70 of England's finest families were gathered to celebrate the Duke of Ashford's return from the continent. Cecily took her arm. "Stop looking at it like that." "Like what?" "Like you're calculating how quickly you could leave." Vivienne said nothing, which was answer enough. She had not wanted to come. Cecily had presented the invitation as a kindness, a chance to be somewhere that was not the cramped set of rooms Vivienne currently called home. Perhaps it was. But Vivienne had learned in the past 3 years that places like Ashford Park were rarely kind to women like her. Too well-born to be ignored, too fallen to be accepted. She knew exactly where every sharp edge was. Still, she had come. The entrance hall was cool and marble-floored, already crowded with arriving guests. Vivienne stayed close to Cecily and kept her expression precisely where she wanted it, pleasant, composed, revealing nothing. It was in this state of careful neutrality that she first saw him. He stood near the far end of the hall, speaking with 2 older gentlemen. Tall, dark-haired, dressed with the quiet confidence of someone who had never once needed to think about whether his clothing was appropriate. He was not laughing at whatever was being said, though one corner of his mouth moved in something that might, under more relaxed circumstances, have become a smile. "Julian Ashford, Duke of Ashford," he looked up. It lasted less than 2 seconds. His gaze moved across the room, found her, and passed on. Nothing registered on his face. Vivienne looked away first, purely a matter of habit. She had learned it was always better to be the one who looked away first. "Come," Cecily said, "I'll show you to the room." Vivienne followed. She did not look back. She had been at Ashford Park for exactly 40 minutes when the Duchess found her. Vivienne had come downstairs earlier than Cecily and found a quiet window seat at the end of a long gallery, looking out over the south lawn. She was not hiding. She was simply not performing, which in a house like this amounted to nearly the same thing. She heard footsteps that were too deliberate to be accidental. "Miss Voss," Vivienne turned. The Duchess of Ashford was perhaps 60, silver-haired and straight-backed, dressed in deep blue with the kind of quiet elegance that announced, without effort, that she had never once needed to try. Her face was composed in an expression of perfect pleasantness. Her eyes were not pleasant at all. Vivienne stood. "Your Grace." "I don't believe we have been formally introduced." The Duchess moved to stand beside her, looking out at the lawn as though they were having a perfectly ordinary conversation. "But I make it my business to know Cecily Hargrove's friends. She has been very kind to me." "How lovely," A pause. Then, without any change in tone, "You are Baron Voss's daughter." It was not a question. "I am. The late Baron Voss." Another pause. "Debts, I believe, a great many of them." "Yes," Vivian said simply. The Duchess turned to look at her. The pleasantness in her expression had not shifted. It was entirely steady, entirely composed, and entirely without warmth of any kind. "You are a pretty girl, Miss Voss, and I suspect you are an intelligent one, so I will speak to you as I would an intelligent woman." She folded her hands. "My son is recently returned. He will be expected to make a suitable match this season. I would find it inconvenient if any unnecessary complications arose." Vivian held her gaze for 3 full seconds. "You are not what this family needs, Miss Voss." The words were delivered with the same pleasant composure as everything else. No malice in the voice, no cruelty in the face, simply a fact stated as one states the weather. Vivian inclined her head, the smallest acceptable acknowledgement. "Thank you for the introduction, Your Grace." She turned and walked back down the gallery toward the main stairs. She did not hurry. She did not alter her pace by a single step. She kept her shoulders back and her chin level, and she did not allow her hands to shake until she had turned the corner and was entirely out of sight. Tea was served on the south terrace at 4 o'clock. Vivian sat beside Cecily and smiled at the appropriate moments and ate a single small sandwich she did not taste. The Duke moved through his guests with efficient courtesy, said the right things, stood at the right distance, laughed at appropriate intervals. Vivian watched him the way she watched most things at gatherings like this, quietly from the periphery. He had good manners, she noted, not performed good manners, the real kind. When he spoke with the elderly Countess of Brentwood, he slowed down. When a young girl of perhaps 17 said something nervous about the gardens, he answered her seriously, without condescension. She had not expected that. 3 times during tea, their eyes came close to meeting. Each time Vivian looked away first. He had not spoken to her. He would not speak to her. His mother had made certain of that 40 minutes into her arrival. She understood the parameters. She would be polite. She would be unobtrusive. She would leave on Monday morning without having caused a single inconvenience to anyone. That was the plan. She did not yet know about the library. She did not yet know that Julian Ashford read until midnight when he could not sleep. She did not yet know that on the 3rd night of her stay, she would not be able to sleep either. At dinner, Julian sat at the head of a table of 32 and did not once look in her direction. Vivian sat 11 places down on the left, between Cecily and a pleasant but largely silent baronet from Dorset, and spoke about gardens and the season and the general pleasures of the countryside. She went to bed at 10:30 and lay in the dark looking at the ceiling. "You are not what this family needs, Miss Voss." She had heard variations of that sentence before. She had built something very efficient around the part of herself that would have cared, very solid, very reliable. She closed her eyes. Somewhere down the long corridor of Ashford Park, in the library she had not yet found, a lamp was still burning. She did not know that, she slept. The promise had been easy to make. Julian had not even argued. That was the part that stayed with him afterward, how simple it had seemed, standing in his mother's sitting room on Saturday morning while the house was still quiet. She had come to him before breakfast, which meant it was important. His mother did not visit before breakfast for anything less. She had been calm. She was always calm. That was her particular gift, the ability to present the most consequential things in the most ordinary tones. "The Voss girl," she said, pouring her own tea with steady hands. "I want you to be careful." Julian looked up from the window. "I've spoken to her once, briefly." "You looked at her 4 times at dinner." He said nothing to that, partly because he could not immediately dispute it, partly because the fact that his mother had been counting unsettled him in a way he did not care to examine. Her father's estate was dissolved 2 years ago, his mother continued. The family has nothing, she has nothing. She set down her cup. Julian, you have been back from the continent for 2 months. There are suitable matches here this weekend. The Pemberton girl is lovely. The Ashworth daughters are both accomplished. I am not asking you to make any decisions immediately. I am simply asking you to be sensible. He looked at her for a moment, then he nodded. 1 week, she said, not a question. 1 week, he agreed. He was, it turned out, very good at keeping promises he had decided to keep. Saturday passed without incident. Julian was a courteous and attentive host, and if Vivian Voss received no more of his attention than the Dorset baronet's wife or the elderly Countess of Brentwood, no one could have found fault with him. He was not cold to her. He was simply nothing to her, which was an entirely different thing and considerably easier to maintain. He noticed her, of course. That was not something he could simply decide not to do. She sat in the garden on Saturday afternoon with Cecily and read for an hour while the other guests played croquet on the lawn. She laughed at something Cecily said, not the small performed laugh most women deployed in company, but a real one, quick and unguarded, gone before it could be observed too carefully. She wore a yellow dress that was not new and did not pretend to be. She did not look toward the croquet with any expression that could have been called longing. Julian watched none of this. He was playing croquet. Sunday was church, a long luncheon, and an afternoon of cards. Vivian played whist with Cecily and 2 older ladies and won twice. Julian was occupied with the Pemberton girl, who was indeed lovely and who laughed at everything he said, which he was trying to find charming. Monday the weather turned, and the house retreated indoors. Tuesday was the day he almost broke. It was not dramatic. He had been in the East sitting room dealing with correspondence for 2 hours, estate matters, letters from his solicitor, obligations he could not remember agreeing to when he heard voices in the corridor. His mother's, and then a younger woman's. Even, unhurried, entirely without the nervous brightness most women deployed when speaking with the Duchess. A few minutes later the door opened and his mother entered. Behind her, at a slight distance, was Vivian Voss. Julian stood. I was just showing Miss Voss the Holbein, his mother said pleasantly. A small portrait by the east window, minor, unremarkable. It's remarkable, Vivian said. She was looking at the portrait, not at him. The light in the background, it's unusual for the period. Julian looked at the portrait. He had lived in this house for 31 years and had never given it any particular thought. I believe my grandfather acquired it in Amsterdam, he said, because something seemed required. She turned then, looked at him directly for the first time since Friday evening. Her eyes were gray. Do you know the provenance? Not precisely. It would be worth finding out. She looked back at the painting. If it's genuine, it's worth considerably more than it appears. I'll mention it to my steward, Julian said. She nodded, as though this were entirely satisfactory, and followed his mother back into the corridor. Julian sat back down at his desk and looked at his correspondence. He was very busy. There were many letters. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday passed. Julian had 2 long conversations with Miss Pemberton about her time in Bath, which were perfectly pleasant, and one with the elder Miss Ashworth about botany, which was more genuinely interesting than he had expected. He watched Vivian Voss the way you watch something in your peripheral vision, not looking, not quite not looking. A constant low awareness that required no particular attention and produced no particular comfort. She did not try to speak with him. This was entirely appropriate and precisely what the situation called for. She existed pleasantly in the spaces available to her, spoke with whoever sought her out, and appeared to be having a perfectly agreeable time. It bothered him. Not because he wanted her to pursue him. It was something else, something about the quality of her withdrawal. The other women at the house party, when they understood his attention was not forthcoming, demonstrated this in visible ways. A slight stiffness, a careful brightness. Vivian did none of this. She simply continued, as though his attention were neither something she had been seeking nor something she had been deprived of. As though she had known from the beginning it was not available, and had arranged her expectations accordingly before she had even arrived. On Friday evening after dinner, Julian sat in the drawing room and watched her listen to Miss Pemberton play the pianoforte. Vivian's hands were folded in her lap. She was genuinely listening, not performing attention, but actually present to the music. At one point, something in the piece shifted a minor key, a slightly unexpected chord, and something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, something more interior than that. Julian looked away. One week he had said it was Friday. The library at Ashford Park was on the ground floor of the north wing, which meant most guests never ventured near it in the evenings. Julian had slept badly since returning from the continent, not nightmares, simply a persistent alertness that darkness did not cure. He had fallen into the habit of reading until his mind finally consented to quiet. He did not hear her until he was already inside. She was in the far corner in the chair nearest the small lamp, with a book open in her lap and her shoes off. This last detail was unexpected. The shoes placed neatly beside the chair. She was sitting sideways, legs tucked, the way a person sits when completely certain they are alone. She heard him at the same moment. Neither of them moved. Then Vivian straightened, reaching for her shoes, and Julian said, because the silence was about to become something neither of them could comfortably navigate, "You don't have to." She stopped, looked at him. "The shoes," he said. "It's 11:30. I don't think formality is particularly necessary." She lowered her hands, did not resume her previous position, but did not reach for the shoes again either. Julian crossed to the shelves on the opposite wall, found the book he had left there 2 nights ago, and sat in the chair across from her. A good distance between them. The lamp made a small, warm circle in the dark room. He opened his book. After a moment, she opened hers. They read for perhaps 10 minutes in complete silence. Julian found it remarkably comfortable. He could not have said why. Silence with most people felt like the absence of conversation. This felt like something else entirely. "You are still here," he said. He had not planned to speak. She looked up. "You sound surprised, Your Grace." "The house party ended yesterday. Cecily asked me to stay through the weekend. I leave Monday." She held his gaze. "Is that inconvenient?" It was the first time she had said anything that acknowledged, however obliquely, the shape of the past week. The careful distance, his absence from any space she occupied. She said it without accusation, without any desire for apology. Simply a question, practical and direct. "No," Julian said. She looked back at her book. Julian looked at his own page. "Read the same paragraph 3 times. "What are you reading?" he asked. She turned the cover toward him without comment. A history of the Dutch Golden Age, dense, scholarly, not the sort of thing typically found in a country house library. "My grandfather's collection," Julian said. "He spent time in Amsterdam." "That explains the Holbein." "Possibly." A silence. Then, "Do you actually not know its provenance, or were you being polite?" Julian found, to his mild surprise, that he wanted to smile. "I genuinely don't know. My mother manages the collection." Something passed across Vivian's face, very brief. She looked back at her book. They stayed until nearly 1 in the morning, reading mostly in silence, speaking occasionally about Amsterdam, about the Dutch Golden Age, about an obscure navigational dispute in the 1640s that somehow sustained 20 minutes of conversation neither of them had planned to have. She left first. At the door she paused. "Good night, Your Grace." "Good night, Miss Voss." She left. Julian sat in the library for another quarter of an hour, looking at his book without reading it. 1 week, he had said. It was technically still Friday for another hour. He was not certain that mattered anymore. The weekend had a different quality after Friday night. Nothing had changed, technically. Vivian still occupied the small room at the end of the guest wing. Julian still had a house to manage, guests to attend to, a mother who watched him with the patient attention of someone who has learned that vigilance is its own form of power. The remaining guests moved through Saturday morning with the unhurried ease of people with nowhere else to be. Nothing had changed. And yet, Julian found himself aware of where she was in a way that was no longer purely habitual. Before, it had been the automatic awareness of a host accounting for his guests. Now it was something more specific and less comfortable. He had spent Saturday morning in his study pretending to read correspondence. She was in the garden after breakfast, walking the gravel path along the east wall with Cecily. He saw them from the window. He returned to his correspondence. He was, he told himself, being entirely sensible. It was Cecily Hargrove who told him. Not deliberately, Cecily was not a strategist. She mentioned it at breakfast on Saturday with the artless ease of someone sharing ordinary information, because to Cecily it was ordinary information. They had been talking about the gardens, then the season, and then, in that wandering way conversations sometimes moved, about her friend. She designed it herself, Cecily said. Designed what? The curriculum for the girls. Cecily looked at him as though this were information he should already possess. She teaches, has done for nearly 2 years, Mrs. Alcott's school in Kensington for the daughters of tradesmen mostly. Vivian approached them when they were struggling financially and offered to teach literature and correspondence for almost nothing. She rewrote their entire reading program. A pause. She never mentions it. I don't think she considers it remarkable. Julian looked at the roses. No, I don't imagine she would. Her father was not a bad man, Cecily continued carefully. He was simply not a careful one. The debts were his. The consequences were hers. She settled what she could with her own money before it was entirely gone. The solicitors told her she wasn't obligated. She said obligation had nothing to do with it. Julian said nothing. She's been very alone since it happened, Cecily said quietly. The people who knew her family, most of them simply stopped. The invitations became less frequent and then stopped entirely, and no one ever said anything direct, but everyone understood. She paused. I have always found that the hardest part, not the ones who make a noise about their suffering, the ones who simply continue, as though they have decided that making a noise would accomplish nothing, so they don't. You were telling me about your friend, Julian said. Cecily looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite name. Yes, she said, I was. That evening at dinner, he watched Vivian with the particular attention of someone looking for evidence of what they had just been told. It was not visible exactly. She was composed, pleasant, present. She listened well. She spoke when she had something to say. But he began to see what had been there all along. The careful economy of her reactions. The way she held herself in spaces as though she had pre-calculated exactly how much of them she was entitled to occupy. The way she laughed when she laughed, as though joy were something she permitted herself in measured quantities. Across the table, his mother watched him watch her. Julian reached for his wine. Sunday arrived with the particular brightness of a summer morning that intends to be noticed. He came around the corner of the east wall and found her standing near the roses with her sketching book open, drawing something. She did not hear him immediately. He had a moment of observing her unobserved, which felt both like a privilege and a trespass. She was drawing the wall itself, not the flowers. The old stone, the way the morning light hit it unevenly, the shadow cast by the coping along the top. Her focus was total. She heard him and looked up. No startled flush, no quick closing of the book. She simply looked at him, then back at the wall. "The light will change in about 20 minutes. The angle is best now." Julian looked at the wall. The light was doing something interesting now that she mentioned it. "May I?" She turned the book toward him. The sketch was precise, architectural rather than romantic, paying attention to the irregular mortar lines, the slight bow of the old stones. It was genuinely good. "You've drawn it before," he said. "I draw walls and staircases, structural things. They don't move. Most people prefer flowers. Most people draw what they're expected to draw." She returned her attention to the wall. "I find the permanence interesting. A wall like this one has been standing for 200 years. It doesn't care what season it is." Julian looked at it. 200 years. His great-great-grandfather had built this section. It had survived everything, weather, neglect, 2 generations of children using it as a target for various projectiles. "My father used to bring me here in the mornings," he said. He had not planned to say this. Before the house woke up, he said early morning was the only time a garden was actually honest. Vivian looked at him. "Honest how?" He meant that gardens in full company are performing. "Early morning, it's just itself." He paused. "He died when I was 14. I hadn't thought about that in some time." A silence. Vivian looked back at her sketch. "My mother used to read to me in the evenings," she said after a moment. "After my father's affairs became what they were," she stopped. Not deliberately, she simply had less in her by the end of each day. "I didn't say anything because I understood, but I missed it. A beat. She died 4 years ago, the year before the estate was dissolved. The hardest part was the particular loneliness of having things to say and no one to say them to." Julian looked at the side of her face. "I'm sorry," he said. "Yes, plain, without the performance of grief or the performance of being past it, just the acknowledgement of a fact." He stayed where he was and said nothing further, because it seemed to him that she had not said those things in order to receive a response. She had said them because the morning was early and the garden was honest, and she had, for a moment, allowed herself to simply be what she was. He understood that. He had not expected to. His mother found him after church. She appeared at his elbow as the carriages were being brought around. "You are not being careful," she said. Her voice was entirely pleasant. "I walked in the garden this morning. She was there. We exchanged a few words." "Julian," she touched his arm, a gesture that looked to anyone watching like affectionate maternal contact. "I understand that she is appealing, that quality of quietness, that sense of hidden depth, but consider what it would mean. Her name is already compromised. To attach yourself to that, the whispers alone would undermine everything you've worked to restore since your father died." A pause. "There are simpler choices here, better ones." "You mean more convenient ones?" "I mean ones that will not cost you more than they give." Her voice remained entirely kind. "I want you to be happy, Julian. I simply know from longer experience that happiness built on an inconvenient foundation does not last." Julian looked at the churchyard. At the old stone, the yew trees, the graves of people well past caring about convenient foundations. "I appreciate your concern," he said. His mother smiled. "That is not a reassurance." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." That afternoon in the billiard room, Hargrove, Cecily's cousin, pleasant and not particularly perceptive, said something that lodged in Julian's thoughts like a splinter. They had been discussing the season when Hargrove mentioned the Voss name in passing. Poor girl. Her father was a disaster, of course, but she's been decent enough about it. Paid back Cathcart's father herself, did you know that? Every penny. Took her 18 months. He sank a ball neatly. Cathcart told me she came to his father's solicitor in person. Wouldn't accept any reduction. Said it was her father's debt and she would honor it. A shrug. Strange thing to do, really. No one expected it. Julian lined up his shot and did not make it, which was unusual for him. No one had expected it. Because what Vivian had done, paying a dead man's debts out of her own diminished resources, 18 months of quiet sacrifice that no one had asked for and almost no one had noticed, did not fit the story everyone had already written for her. Fallen Baron's daughter, compromised name, best avoided. They had written the story before they had learned a single fact about her. Dinner that evening was the moment his mother chose. It began with someone mentioning an acquaintance of the late Baron Voss. A simple observation, nothing hostile, his mother said with perfect warmth. Such a sad situation. The Baron was rather better liked than he was wise. It is always the families who suffer most in those cases. A murmur of agreement. Miss Voss has managed admirably, of course, his mother continued with generous sympathy. It cannot be easy carrying that sort of history into company. One always wonders, though one would never say whether certain associations do more harm than good in the end, for everyone involved. The table understood perfectly. Nothing direct had been said, so nothing could be challenged or refuted. Just a shape left in the air, and everyone filling it with their own understanding. Vivian, sitting 4 places down on the left, continued eating her soup. She did not look up, she did not change expression. Her spoon moved steadily. Julian watched her hold herself utterly still inside what had just happened to her, in front of 8 people, at someone else's dinner table. He watched her choose the particular dignity of continuing as though nothing had occurred, because any other response would have been used against her. He said nothing. He hated that he said nothing. Not a dramatic emotion, just a cold, settled recognition of his own failure that sat in his chest for the rest of the evening and did not leave. After dinner, when Vivian moved quietly toward the staircase, Julian stood near the doorway with a glass he hadn't touched. His mother appeared beside him. She handled that well, she said, with apparent approval, as though this were a compliment, as though she had not been the one who had required Vivian to handle anything at all. Julian looked at his mother for a long moment. He said nothing. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about gray eyes and steady hands, and the particular courage of people who have decided that making a noise would accomplish nothing, so they simply don't. He thought about that for a very long time. She had been packed before. Vivian sat on the edge of her bed with her trunk half filled and the window open to the early summer air. She had done this before, assembled her things with quiet efficiency, closed the clasps, carried herself out of spaces that had made clear she was not quite welcome. She had become good at it. You simply went, tidily, without fuss. Cecily had asked her to stay through the following weekend. Vivian had said she would think about it. She was thinking about it now. Sunday dinner had been what it had been. She did not blame the other guests. They had simply responded to what had been placed in front of them, the way people always did. The Duchess had constructed the moment with great skill, and Vivian had sat inside it and made the only choice available to someone in her position, which was to pretend nothing had happened. She was very practiced at pretending nothing had happened. What she was less practiced at, what she could not quite manage with her usual efficiency, was the other thing. The thing that had nothing to do with the Duchess. He had said nothing. She understood why. She had not arrived at Ashford Park with any expectations of Julian Ashford, and the past week had not substantially altered that. They had spoken in the library. They had spoken in the garden. He had looked at her occasionally in a way that was different from how he looked at other things. She had noticed. She was not an idiot, but she had also noticed the careful distance he maintained in company, the way his attention withdrew when his mother was in the room. He was a man with obligations. She was a complication he had been correctly warned away from. She understood all of this. She still could not make the sight of him standing there, silent, untouched glass in hand, fit into the part of her chest where she kept things she had decided not to care about. She folded the shawl, placed it in the trunk, decided nothing, It was Cecily who told her about Miss Pemberton. Not deliberately, and not unkindly. She mentioned it at breakfast with the artless ease of someone sharing ordinary information, because to Cecily it was ordinary information. "The Duchess seems very taken with her," Cecily said, spreading jam on her toast. "Miss Pemberton. She spent an hour with her yesterday afternoon. I saw them in the blue sitting room. Julian was there as well, I think, for part of it." A bite of toast. "She's lovely, of course. Her family has the estate in Gloucestershire. Her mother and the Duchess were at school together, apparently. Isn't that convenient?" "Very," Vivian said. Cecily looked up, put down her toast. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything," Vivian said. "It's perfectly ordinary information. It has nothing to do with me." Cecily was quiet for a moment, then carefully, "Vivian." "Please don't," Vivian said. Cecily didn't. She decided to stay. This was not necessarily the sensible choice. The sensible choice was the half-packed trunk and a Monday morning departure, and the long, quiet train journey back to London, back to the small rooms, the school in Kensington, the 20 girls who needed someone to teach them that written language was a form of power. That was real and solid and hers. But she stayed. Not for any reason she could have defended cleanly. Some obscure unwillingness to be moved before she was ready to go. A difference, she had always believed, between leaving because you had decided to leave and leaving because you had been made to feel you had no choice. She unpacked the shawl, closed the trunk, went downstairs. Monday and Tuesday passed in their ordinary way. Julian was present in the manner of a man fulfilling a set of functions. He spoke to her twice in 2 days, both times in company, both times briefly, both times with a courtesy that was impeccable and revealed nothing. She returned the courtesy in kind. On Tuesday afternoon, she was in the library when she heard him pause in the corridor outside. The door did not open. After a moment, his footsteps continued. Vivian looked at the book in her hands and read the same page 4 times. Wednesday brought 2 new guests, Lord and Lady Forthright, old friends of the Duchess. Their arrival shifted the atmosphere of the house in some indefinable way. The Duchess was more animated than Vivian had seen her. There was talk of a dinner on Friday. A small assembly, perhaps. Vivian was in the garden when she heard it. She had not been listening. Or rather, she had been listening to the garden, and the window of the morning room had been open, and she had not moved away quickly enough. "The Pemberton girl," Lady Forthright was saying. "Margaret, she is a delight, and the family is everything one could want." "I thought so," the Duchess's voice, warm and satisfied. "Julian met with her father last month in London. I believe they are very close to an understanding." An announcement at the assembly, perhaps. A small pause. Perhaps, or shortly after. Julian does not respond well to being rushed, but the direction is clear. And he is amenable. "Julian is sensible," the Duchess said. "He always has been when given time to be." Vivian moved away from the window then, with the care of someone who does not want their movement to be heard. She walked to the far end of the garden, to the old east wall, and stood in front of it. The direction is clear. Of course it was. It had always been clear. She had known the shape of this from the moment the Duchess had stopped her in the gallery on Friday evening. She had stayed for her own reasons. She told herself reasons that had nothing to do with Julian Ashford. She put her hand flat against the stone, warm from the morning sun, slightly rough under her palm, old and indifferent and permanent. Then she went inside and wrote a letter to the school in Kensington, asking whether her return could be arranged for the end of the week. She began packing on Thursday evening. Properly this time, everything folded and placed with quiet efficiency. She was methodical. There was comfort in method. She was closing the second clasp when the knock came. Not Cecily's knock, 3 quick impatient taps. This was 2 knocks, slightly hesitant. She knew before she opened the door. There was only one other person in this house with any reason to come to this end of the corridor at this hour. She opened it. Julian stood in the corridor looking fractionally less assembled than usual. Not disheveled, simply a fraction less composed. Like a man who had made a decision and was still deciding whether it was the right one. He looked at the trunk behind her. "Where are you going?" he said. "Back to London. I have work to return to." "The school." A pause she had not known that he knew. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. Then, without particular inflection, "Miss Voss, what do you think of me?" It was such an unexpected question that she simply looked at him. "I beg your pardon." "I am asking your honest opinion of me as a person." He appeared entirely serious. "I am aware it is an unusual question." Vivian considered him. The corridor was quiet, the rest of the house distant within its evening routines. This was the most unguarded she had ever seen him. "You are intelligent," she said, "and not unkind when you permit yourself not to be. You are better than you behave, which is either a hopeful quality or a wasted one, depending on whether you intend to do anything about it." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. "That is a fair answer," he said. "You asked for an honest one." "Yes." Something in his face shifted, a quality of attention she had not encountered from him before, not directly, not openly, not in a corridor at 9 o'clock with her trunk standing packed behind her. "I said nothing at dinner on Sunday. I should have." Vivian said nothing. "I cannot explain it in a way that makes it acceptable. I allowed myself to be managed. I have been allowing it for longer than Sunday." He paused. "I don't have an excuse for it." "I didn't ask for one." "I know, I'm acknowledging the absence of one." Another pause. "Because you are leaving on Friday and I would like you not to." The corridor was very quiet. "Your Grace," Vivian said carefully, "I believe there is a Miss Pemberton." Something moved across his face. "There is an arrangement my mother considers settled, and that I have allowed to proceed by not actively preventing it, which is not the same as settled. It is close enough." Vivian, her name, without title, without ceremony, it arrived so quietly that for a moment she wasn't certain she had heard correctly. He seemed to realize what he had said, did not apologize for it. "I am asking you to stay." She looked at him. He looked back. She thought about the library and the east wall and the particular quality of a silence shared with someone who did not require you to fill it. She thought about a dinner table and an untouched glass, and the recognition in his face, seen and unacknowledged, of a man who understood his own failure in real time and could not correct it. She thought about the Duchess's voice through an open window. "Julian is sensible. He always has been when given time to be." "Good night, Your Grace," she said. She closed the door. She stood on the other side of it and pressed her hand flat against the wood, the way she had pressed it against the old wall in the garden, and stayed very still for a long time. She did not unpack the trunk. But she did not sleep well either. She left on Friday morning, as she had said she would. The carriage was arranged for 9:30. Vivian came downstairs at 15:15 with her trunk and her hat and her composed expression, and said goodbye to Cecily in the entrance hall with the particular warmth she reserved for the very few people she actually meant things toward. Cecily held her hands a moment longer than necessary and said nothing, which was its own kind of saying something. The Duchess was not present, a deliberate absence, the closing of an account. Vivian had arrived as a nonentity and was departing as one, and the Duchess wished this understood without anything so vulgar as acknowledgement. Vivian understood it perfectly. She did not look for Julian as she crossed the entrance hall. She had decided, somewhere in the sleepless hours between Thursday night and Friday morning, that looking for him would be the one indulgence she would not permit herself. She had looked for too many things in her life and found them absent. The looking was its own kind of hope, and hope was the thing that made the absence matter. So she did not look. She crossed the marble floor and went through the front door and down the stone steps and got into the carriage. The carriage moved. Ashford Park receded behind her in the June morning light. She opened her book and read the same page 6 times and eventually gave up and looked out the window instead. The countryside was very green. She had always found green countryside irritating when she was unhappy. It seemed unnecessary, an excess of pleasantness. London received her with its usual indifference. The rooms in Kensington were exactly as she had left them, small, clean, adequately furnished, belonging to someone who had made peace with adequacy. The school was 3 streets away. 20 girls would return in 6 weeks. She had lesson plans to revise, a reading list to update, a correspondence with a printer in Cheapside about new texts for the autumn term. She returned to all of it with the deliberate efficiency of someone filling a space that might otherwise remain empty and dangerous. She revised the lesson plans. She wrote to the printer. She walked to the market on Tuesday morning and bought vegetables and a bunch of flowers that she did not strictly need, but which seemed, in the moment, like the kind of thing a person with a functioning life would purchase. She put the flowers in a glass on the windowsill. She revised the lesson plans again. 3 weeks passed. She did not think about Ashford Park, or about libraries, or about a corridor at 9 o'clock in the evening, or about the particular way a person could say one's name without title and make it sound like the first honest thing they had said in a very long time. She did not think about any of these things with a consistency and discipline that would have impressed her, under other circumstances, very much. Cecily wrote once, a cheerful letter full of seasoned gossip that mentioned the Ashford House party only obliquely, which Vivian understood to be kindness. She wrote back about the school, the printer, a new edition of Wollstonecraft she had found near the Strand. She did not ask about anything she wanted to know. It was on a Tuesday in late July that Cecily's second letter arrived. Vivian set it on the table and made tea first. Then she sat down and opened it. Cecily wrote the way she spoke, quickly, with occasional underlinings that indicated particular emphasis. My dearest Vivian, I am writing because something has occurred that I believe you should know, and which I believe you would want to know even if you would prefer not to want to know it. The Pemberton engagement has not been announced. Vivian set down her cup. I had it from my cousin who had it from Hargrove who spoke with someone in the Ashford solicitor's office. Apparently the Duke declined to proceed. No public statement. Simply declined. His mother is reportedly not pleased, which is the least surprising sentence I have ever written. There is also something else. A rumor, and I want to be clear it is only a rumor, that the Duchess has said something to someone about your family, not the debt. Something about your father and the Ashford estate. I do not know the content. I only know that it is being spoken of, which regardless of its truth is not nothing. Write to me, please, C. Vivian read the letter twice. Then she folded it with great care and sat for a while looking at the flowers on the windowsill. The Pemberton engagement had not been announced. Something about your father and the Ashford estate. She turned both pieces of information over carefully, trying to see all the surfaces before deciding what any of it meant. What it meant, she concluded, was nothing she could act on. It was incomplete. The appropriate response was to note it and wait. She wrote back to Cecily. She thanked her. She said she was well. She did not ask about anything she wanted to know. The letter from Julian arrived on a Thursday. Not a note, a letter. 3 pages in a hand that was precise without being rigid. She held it for a moment before reading it, recognized that she was delaying and stopped. Miss Voss. I am writing because I owe you an explanation, and because I find, having begun and abandoned 4 previous attempts at a different kind of correspondence, that an explanation is the only form of communication I can currently justify. My mother has said something to several people about your father. The substance is this: that your father, in the final year of his life, came into possession of certain financial information pertaining to the Ashford estate, and that rather than bringing this to the family, he used it for his own purposes. I do not know whether this is true. I have made clear to my mother that this information should not have been circulated as it has been. She does not agree. I am writing because you deserve to know what is being said. I am writing because I did not speak at a dinner table in June when I should have, and I am not willing to compound that silence with another one. I am also writing, and this is the part I have rewritten 4 times, because I think about you with a frequency and consistency that has not diminished with your absence, and which I no longer find useful to pretend otherwise about. I do not know what to do with that last sentence. I offer it as information, not as a demand. J. Ashford. Vivian read the letter 3 times. Then she put it down and pressed her fingers against her eyes and sat very still. Her father. She had not thought about her father in relation to the Ashford family in a very long time. She had thought about his debts, his carelessness, the long trail of consequence he had left without ever quite seeming to understand he was leaving it. She had thought about her mother's face in the last year, worn thin by worry. She had thought about the solicitors, the creditors, the long process of settlement she had overseen alone at 23 because there was no one else. She had not thought about this. She sat for a long time, then she took out her writing paper. Your Grace. Thank you for telling me. What your mother has said is not entirely false. My father did come into possession of information about your family's affairs. I have known this for some years. I do not believe he used it in the way she has implied, but I understand that my belief on this matter is not evidence. I would ask one question, and I ask it because I think you deserve an honest answer rather than none at all. Do you believe it? Vivas. She sealed it before she could reconsider, posted it the same afternoon. His reply came in 2 days. Miss Voss, number J. Ashford, 1 word. She read it standing at her door with the envelope still in her hand. The afternoon post had just been delivered. She stood there long enough that her downstairs neighbor came through the front door and gave her a slightly concerned look as she passed. No. He did not believe it. She folded the letter, put it in the drawer of her writing desk with the first one, stood looking at the closed drawer. And then the thing she had been carefully, methodically, successfully not feeling for 6 weeks arrived all at once, quietly and without drama, the way the most significant things usually did. Not as a storm, but as a tide, steady and inevitable and already further in than she had realized. She sat down. She did not cry. That was not generally her way. She simply sat and felt the full weight of it, the 6 weeks, the library, the corridor, the letter with its careful rewritten sentence, and the single word that had arrived in 2 days because some things did not require more words than they required. Then she got up, because there were lesson plans to revise and a letter to write to the printer and a perfectly organized life to maintain. She made tea. She stood at the window and looked at the flowers. She had not replaced them when they died. The glass on the windowsill was empty. She had not noticed until now. The second letter from Cecily arrived on a Saturday, 3 days after Julian's reply. It contained 2 sentences. Vivian, I have learned what the rumor actually is. It is not what you think. Your father did not use the information. He protected it, and the Duchess has known this for 20 years. Vivian read these 2 sentences 4 times. Then she put on her coat and her hat and went out into the London afternoon and walked for an hour without any particular destination, because she needed to move, because the rooms were too small for what she was currently trying to think. Her father, her careless, debt-ridden, impossible father, who had left her nothing but consequences, had apparently done one thing, one silent and costly and utterly characteristic thing, and had never told anyone, and had taken it with him when he died. And the woman who had benefited from his silence had spent 20 years turning it into a weapon. She walked until her feet hurt. Then she went home and sat at her writing desk and looked at the drawer where the letters were. She did not write anything that evening. But by morning she had decided something, and once Vivian Voss decided something, the deciding was finished and only the doing remained. The papers had been in the East Study for 11 years. Julian had known this in the vague, unexamined way that one knows things about inherited spaces. The study had been his father's, and after his father's death, it had become a room he used for estate business without ever quite making it his own. His father's books still on the shelves. His father's pen stands still on the desk. Julian had worked around these things for 11 years with the particular respect of someone not yet ready to make a decision about them. He had never gone through the papers. This was not unusual. His father's solicitor had handled the estate documents. His mother had handled everything else, which at the time had seemed natural. She had been the one who was present, who understood the practical requirements of running a household while Julian was at school and then on the continent. He had been grateful for it. He had not questioned it. It occurred to him now to question it. He began on a Thursday morning, 2 days after Vivian's letter had arrived. The one with the single direct question he had been unable to sleep around. Do you believe it? He had written back immediately. One word, because one word was the truth and anything else would have been performance. But he had lain awake afterward thinking about what it meant to say no without being able to say why. Instinct was not evidence. The particular quality of Vivian's face, the absence of anything that looked like guilt, these were not evidence either. They were simply what he knew, which was different from what he could prove. He wanted to prove it. He started with the papers. There were 11 years of them, organized with his mother's characteristic meticulous tidiness. Letters, accounts, receipts, correspondence with solicitors and estate managers. His father's handwriting on the older documents, larger than his own, slightly tilted, ink pressed with some force. Julian read methodically. He was not sure what he was looking for, a gap, perhaps, or an inconsistency, some thread beneath the surface of the documented record connecting things that were not supposed to be connected. He found it on the second day. A single letter, filed between 2 receipts for building work on the Wiltshire property, dated November of 1831. The handwriting was neat and somewhat formal, educated but not aristocratic, addressed not to his father but to his mother. Your Grace, I write to you because I have written to the Duke and received no reply, and because the matter I wish to discuss cannot remain unaddressed. I believe you know the nature of it. I have in my possession the documentation pertaining to the transactions of March and April of this year, the full record, including the correspondence with Messrs. Hartley and Son. I want to be entirely clear about my intentions. I do not intend to use this material. I am not writing to threaten you. I am writing because I believe these transactions, if they became known, would cause significant harm to people who do not deserve it, including my own family, whose connection to your estate in the matter of the Eastern Land lease puts us in a position I would prefer not to be in. What I am proposing is simple. I will hold this documentation. I will not speak of it. In return, I ask nothing except that the lease arrangements be honored as agreed, without the modifications recently suggested by your solicitor, and that this correspondence be treated as a private matter between 2 families who have reason to be discreet. I am not your enemy, Your Grace. I am simply a man who knows something he would prefer not to know, and who is trying to find the arrangement that causes the least harm to the most people. Robert Voss Julian read it twice. Then he sat back in his father's chair and looked at his father's pen stand and thought for a long time. March and April of 1831. He had been 10 years old. He remembered that year dimly, a long summer, a tutor he had disliked, some argument between his parents that had filled the house with tension for several weeks and then resolved itself without explanation, as adult arguments did when you were 10 and not entitled to explanations. He had not known what the argument had been about. He was beginning to understand now. The Hartley correspondence was not difficult to find once he knew the name. Hartley and Son, solicitors in the city, not the family's primary firm, which was itself interesting, used for a specific set of transactions and then never again. The transactions were in a separate folder, filed under a property reference he did not immediately recognize. When he cross-referenced it with the estate maps, he understood why the property had been sold in 1835, the year after his father died, quietly and without attracting attention. He read the transaction records. He read them again. They were not, technically, criminal. That was the careful architecture of them, structured to exist in the space between what was legal and what was not. The Eastern land lease was the most direct example. The original agreement had guaranteed certain terms. The modifications the Ashford solicitors had attempted in late 1830, one would have reduced Robert Voss's income from that land by nearly a third, while technically not breaking the letter of the agreement. His father had known. That much was clear from the correspondence letters to the Hartley firm, demonstrating specific knowledge that could not have been accidental. Whether he had understood the full human cost or had abstracted it into the clean language of estate management, Julian could not determine. The letters were careful and distant and revealed very little of the man he remembered. His mother's letters revealed considerably more. She had been specific and strategic and entirely clear-eyed about what she wanted and how to achieve it. And when Robert Voss had written to her, that careful, honest letter from a man trying to cause the least harm to the most people, she had honored the lease terms for the remainder of his life. And then, after his death, had done precisely what she had always intended. He found the last relevant document at 10:30 on Thursday night. A letter from his mother to the Hartley firm, dated 6 months after Robert Voss's death. 3 sentences. The matter of the Eastern lease is to be considered closed. The Voss estate is to receive no further correspondence from this firm. Any documentation pertaining to the 1831 transactions held by the Voss family is to be assumed destroyed. Assumed destroyed. Not confirmed. Not retrieved. Assumed. Because she had known that Robert Voss was dead and his estate was in collapse and his daughter was 23 and alone and managing creditors, and she had calculated correctly that the documentation would be lost in the chaos or simply disregarded. And then when Vivian had appeared at Ashford Park 20 years later, the Duchess had done what she always did. Assessed the threat, identified the most effective weapon and used it. Not the truth. Something better than the truth. The truth inverted. Julian closed the folder. He sat in the East study for a long time, in his father's chair, and thought about a woman who had paid her father's debts at 23 because obligation had nothing to do with it. About the particular loneliness of having things to say and no one to say them to. About gray eyes in a library at 11:30. About a door closing quietly in a corridor. Then he got up and went to find his mother. She was in her sitting room, as she always was in the evenings, correspondence. A book. The small rituals of a woman who had managed her own time for 30 years. She looked up when he entered without knocking, and something shifted in her expression, so briefly that anyone less familiar with her face would have missed it. She had always known this conversation was a possibility. She had simply calculated it was unlikely. He put Robert Voss's letter on the table beside her. She looked at it, did not touch it. "Sit down, Julian," she said. "I'd rather stand." She looked up at him. Her expression was composed. It was always composed. "You went through your father's papers." "Yes." "I see." She folded her hands. "And what conclusions have you drawn?" "I haven't drawn conclusions. I've read documents." He kept his voice level. Robert Voss knew about the 1831 transactions. He chose not to use that knowledge. He asked for nothing except that the lease terms be honored. You honored them for as long as he was alive, and then you didn't. His mother said nothing. "He protected you," Julian said. "He protected this family. And when his daughter came to Ashford Park, you told people he had done the opposite." "I told people what was useful," his mother said, entirely calm. "Your father's arrangements, had they become known, would have destroyed this family's standing. Robert Voss understood this. That was why he made the arrangement he made. I honored it. Until he died. Until it was no longer necessary to honor it." "And Vivian?" His mother held his gaze. "Vivian Voss is the daughter of a man who held information about this family and calculated how best to use his position. Whether his methods were more gentlemanly than others is." "He didn't use it." Julian looked at her. "That is the entire point. He had it and he chose not to use it, and it cost him, and you knew that, and you still—" He stopped. "Do you understand what you did to her?" Something crossed his mother's face, very brief. "She was not supposed to come here," his mother said. "That was not anticipated. She came as Cecily's guest." "Yes." She looked at the letter without touching it. "I assessed the situation and I acted. You were newly returned. I could see what was happening. I did what I believed was necessary to protect you. You destroyed her father's reputation to keep her away from me. I protected this family, as I have always done." Julian looked at his mother for a long time. She did not look away. She never looked away. He had spent 31 years reading comfort and authority into that steadiness, and he was looking at it now and understanding, fully and finally, that steadiness and rightness were not the same thing. He had confused them for 31 years because it had been easier than the alternative. "I would like you to make a correction," he said, "publicly, to the people you spoke to. No, quiet and entirely final. I have done what I have done, and I will not unmake it, not because I cannot, but because I will not. You may do as you see fit. You are the Duke. You have always had more power in this than you have used. But I will not stand in a drawing room and recant, and you cannot make me." Julian stood. He looked at his mother, at the composed, implacable face of a woman who had loved him with absolute consistency and had also, with equal consistency, managed him toward the shape she required him to be. He felt, not anger exactly, but something colder and more final, a door closing, not with violence, simply closing. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to." He picked up the letter. He left. He found Cecily's address through the Hargrove family and wrote that evening, short, direct, asking for Vivian's address in London. Cecily's reply arrived the following morning with the address and a single additional line. "She already knows most of it. She's been deciding what to do. So have you, I think. Perhaps it's time you both stopped deciding and started doing." Julian read this once, set it aside, and began to pack a bag. His steward appeared in the doorway with a list of estate matters. "Tomorrow," Julian said. His steward looked at the bag. "Will you be long, Your Grace?" Julian thought about a woman who drew walls because they were permanent, who paid debts because obligation had nothing to do with it, who had closed a door in his face in a corridor and been entirely right to do so. "I don't know," he said, "possibly." He left Ashford Park on Friday morning. She had known he might come. This was the honest truth, and Vivian had been practicing honesty with herself long enough to recognize it without difficulty. She had known, from the moment Cecily's second letter arrived, your father did not use it, he protected it, that the shape of things had changed. Julian had the documents now, or was finding them, and he was not a man who found things and did nothing with them. She had known he might come. She had not known what she would do when he did. This was the part she had been unable to resolve in the 2 weeks since Cecily's letter, in the long evenings with the empty glass on the windowsill, and the lesson plans she had revised 4 times without any meaningful improvement. She had turned it over with the methodical care she applied to everything, and she had arrived each time at the same impasse. She knew too precisely what she felt and why, and knowing precisely left no room for comfortable vagueness, no space to pretend she didn't know what she was deciding. She had decided nothing. She had revised the lesson plans again. The knock came on a Friday afternoon. She was at her writing desk, not writing, looking at the empty glass on the windowsill, when she heard it, 2 knocks, slightly hesitant. She knew before she stood, before she crossed the room, before her hand touched the door. She opened it. Julian Ashford stood in the narrow corridor looking fractionally less assembled than usual. He had traveled. His coat had the slight dishevelment of a man who had been in a carriage for several hours, without caring about the effect on his appearance. He was holding a folder of documents. They looked at each other. "You found them," she said. "Yes." She stepped back from the door. He came in, navigating the smallness of her rooms, the writing desk immediately to the left, the 2 chairs by the window, the bookshelf covering most of the far wall. He looked at none of it. He looked at her. "Sit down," she said, because someone had to say something practical. "I'll make tea." "You don't have to." "I know." She moved to the small stove. "Sit down anyway." He sat. She made the tea with her back to him, which gave her something to do with her hands, and a few minutes to be, privately, the version of herself that had not yet decided what face to present. She brought the tray to the table between the 2 chairs and sat down. Julian had not touched the folder. It sat on his knee like something he had carried a long way and was not yet sure how to put down. "Tell me," she said. So he did. He told her everything. Not in the manner of a prepared account, but in the way of someone working through something as they spoke, methodical, honest, occasionally doubling back to add a detail he had omitted. The 1831 transactions, the Hartley correspondence, the lease modifications her father had refused, the letter, Robert Voss's letter, which Julian read aloud. Vivian listened with her hands wrapped around her cup and her eyes on the middle distance, not trusting what her face might do if she looked directly at anything. She had not known about the letter. She had understood, in the way children understand things without being told, that her father had known something about the Ashford family and had chosen to be quiet about it. She had found a reference to the Hartley firm once, years ago, in a box of his papers, and had put it aside because she had been 23 and managing creditors, and there had been no time for things she couldn't immediately use. She had not known about the letter. "I am simply a man who knows something he would prefer not to know, and who is trying to find the arrangement that causes the least harm to the most people." Her father, her careless, debt-ridden, impossible father, who had loved her impractically and left her with consequences and had apparently, once, done the quietest and most costly kind of good thing. The kind that earns nothing, that is not even acknowledged as good because it looks, from the outside, exactly like ordinary silence. She kept her eyes on the middle distance. Julian finished speaking. He set the folder on the table between them. She looked at it for a moment, then at him. "Your mother," she said. "I spoke with her. And is not going to make a public correction. I want to be honest with you about that. She has decided what she did was necessary and she will not recant it." His voice was even, but she could hear something that had settled in it, not bitterness, not anger, something more permanent than both. "I cannot make her, But I have already begun speaking with the people she spoke to. I have the documents. I can show anyone who requires it what the actual record is. It won't undo the damage completely, but it will change what people understand to be true. Vivian looked at the folder. Her father's letter was in there. 3 pages in his slightly formal hand, doing the thing he had always done, trying to find the arrangement that caused the least harm, without any expectation that anyone would notice, or thank him, or remember. She'll always be the villain of this story, Vivian said quietly, not as an accusation, as an observation. Yes, Julian said, she will. Vivian nodded once, set down her cup. The silence that followed was different from their previous silences. Those had been comfortable, the library silence, the garden silence, silences full of a particular ease she had not been able to stop thinking about afterward. This one had weight. It was the silence of 2 people sitting on opposite sides of a table with a folder of documents between them and 3 months of distance and a corridor and a closed door and a single word that had arrived in 2 days, and all of it present in the room, none of it yet spoken. Julian spoke first. I owe you an apology, more than one. The dinner table in June, the corridor, letting you leave on Friday without, he stopped. I have managed things by allowing them to happen to me for a very long time. It has not served either of us. Vivian looked at him. I am not my mother, he said. Not as an excuse, what she did to your father's memory, to your name, that is on me as well because I didn't see it when I should have and didn't act when I could have. But I have spent the last 3 months, a pause. I have been very tired of being managed. By her, by obligation, by my own habit of defaulting to whatever required the least disruption. He looked at her directly. You are the only person I have encountered in a considerable time who has never once tried to manage me. I have had no leverage with which to do so, Vivian said. That's not why. She held his gaze. He was right, and they both knew it. She had not tried to manage him because it genuinely wasn't what she wanted. She had wanted, in the library and in the garden and in the corridor, simply him, the actual person, the one who appeared in early mornings and late evenings when the performance was down. What do you want? She said. Not what is sensible, not what is arranged. What do you actually want? He looked at her for a long moment. You know the answer to that, he said. I want to hear you say it. A pause, not the hesitation of a man who doesn't know, but of a man who is aware that words said aloud in small rooms on Friday afternoons are not retrievable, and who is choosing to say them anyway. I want to marry you, he said. I want to come to Ashford Park and find you in the library at 11:30. I want to walk in the East Garden and hear your opinions on walls and Dutch paintings and things that have been standing for 200 years. I want the rest of my life to be in the direction of you. That is what I want. The room was very quiet. Vivian looked at him, at the slightly traveled coat and the folder of documents and the face of a man who had driven several hours from Berkshire to a small set of rooms in Kensington, because he had stopped allowing things to happen to him by default. She thought about 3 months of lesson plans and empty glasses and flowers she hadn't replaced. She thought about her father, who had tried to find the arrangement that caused the least harm to the most people, and had never told anyone, and who would have thought, she suspected, that sitting in a small room in Kensington with the documented truth in front of her was a better outcome than he had dared to hope for. You should know, she said, that I have 23 girls returning to school in 6 weeks, and a reading program I have rewritten 4 times this summer, and a correspondence with a printer in Cheapside that I fully intend to continue. I know, and I will not live entirely at Ashford Park. I will not be managed into a shape that fits more conveniently. I know that too. And your mother. My mother will remain exactly what she is. I have no power to change that. A pause. I cannot give you a mother-in-law who deserves you. I can give you a husband who does." Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then the real one, quick and unguarded, the one she had not displayed in any drawing room or at any dinner table in 3 years, she smiled. It lasted only a moment. Julian looked at her as though it was the most significant thing he had seen in a considerable while. "Well," she said. "Well," he agreed. She reached across the table and put her hand on the folder. Her father's letter was inside. The truth that had been buried for 20 years and was now, not loudly, not dramatically, but irrevocably, unburied. "Yes," she said. Julian looked at her. "Yes. Yes, that was your question. The one you've been asking since June in one form or another. The answer is yes." Something happened to his face, not dramatic, nothing so simple as a smile, something more interior than that. Something she recognized because she had felt the same thing 6 weeks ago sitting at this same table with a one-word letter in her hands. He reached across the table. She let him take her hand. Outside, London continued in its ordinary way, carts on the street below, voices from the market 2 corners distant, the busy indifference of a city with no opinion about what was happening in a small set of rooms on the 2nd floor of a Kensington townhouse on a Friday afternoon. Inside it was very quiet. They married in September. Not at Ashford Park. Vivian had been quietly firm about this, and Julian had understood without requiring explanation. A small church in the village nearest the Wiltshire estate, which Julian had always preferred anyway. Cecily stood with Vivian. 2 of Julian's oldest friends stood with him. The vicar was elderly and kind and somewhat deaf, which meant the ceremony proceeded at a pleasantly unhurried pace. Vivian wore pale green, which was not what anyone expected and which suited her precisely, because she had not chosen it to suit anyone else. She did not shake. Her hands were steady throughout. Julian looked at her during the vows with the particular attention she had come to understand was his version of expression. Everything contained, everything present, nothing wasted. She looked back. She said her vows in a clear, even voice. He said his without looking away. The Ashford winter party had always been held in December. 40 years of tradition, the house dressed in evergreen and candlelight, the county's finest families assembled in the great hall that Vivian had first entered on a warm Friday afternoon in June as someone else's guest. Uninvited, already identified, already assessed. She remembered the marble floor, the chandelier scattering light in pieces, looking across the room and finding, without meaning to, a man standing near the far wall who had looked back for less than 2 seconds and passed on. She stood now at the top of the main staircase and looked down at that same floor, that same chandelier, those same tall windows reflecting the December dark back at the assembled guests below, and felt the distance between that June afternoon and this December evening as something physical. Not a weight, exactly. A texture. The particular substance of time that has been lived through rather than simply passed. Cecily appeared at her elbow, resplendent in deep red, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" Standing very still and looking at things with that expression. "What expression?" "The one that means you're thinking something significant and have no intention of sharing it." Cecily pressed a glass into her hand. "Come down. Your husband has been looking for you for 10 minutes and is being very composed about it, which means he's been looking for you for longer than 10 minutes. Vivian accepted the glass, looked once more at the hall below, the voices, the candlelight, the assembled weight of the county's expectations about who belonged in spaces like this, and felt, with a clarity that required no examination, that none of it had any particular power over her. It was a good feeling. She had earned it at considerable cost and she intended to keep it. She went downstairs. Julian found her near the east doorway. He looked at her with the expression she had come to know as his version of relief, contained, understated, present in the slight easing around the eyes and nowhere else. Cecily said you were at the top of the stairs. I was, now I'm here. Logical. He handed her a second glass, which she accepted despite already holding one. He looked at the two glasses. She looked at the two glasses. One of them is for you, she said. Naturally. She gave him the one Cecily had brought. He accepted it without comment. This was one of the things she had come to appreciate about him, the absence of unnecessary commentary on situations that explained themselves. Around them the party moved in its stately way. Vivian moved through it with Julian beside her, and she observed, as she had observed at every Ashford gathering since September, the particular geometry of how people positioned themselves in relation to her now. Closer than before, more direct. The careful sideways approach of people who had previously understood her to be a complication had been replaced, gradually and without announcement, by something more straightforward. Julian had been thorough. She had not asked him to be, and he had not reported on the details, but the evidence was in the room, in the way the Forthrights greeted her with genuine warmth, in the way young Hargrove mentioned her father's name in passing without weighted delicacy, in the way the conversation around her had stopped performing its awareness of her history and simply moved forward. The documents had done their work quietly. That was how the best corrections operated, not loudly, not dramatically, simply persistently. The truth, made available to people who had been deprived of it, allowed to settle into the record at its own pace. She saw the Duchess at 9:30. Margaret Ashford had not left. Vivian had not expected her to. Whatever else could be said about the woman, she was not someone who retreated. She stood near the fireplace surrounded by three of the older county families, silver-haired and composed in her characteristic deep blue, looking, for all outward purposes, exactly as she had always looked. Vivian watched her from across the room. She had thought in the months since September about what she felt toward Julian's mother. It did not resolve itself cleanly, which she had come to accept. There was anger, specific and well-founded, not the hot variety but the cooler kind that came from understanding precisely what had been done and why. There was something adjacent to pity, which she had not expected. And underneath both, a kind of clarity, the clarity of a person who has looked at something directly, understood it fully, and is no longer required to be afraid of it. Margaret Ashford had done what she had done because she believed, with complete conviction, that her family required protection and that she was the one to provide it. She had been wrong about what protection meant, wrong about what her family needed, wrong about Vivian and about Robert Voss, and about the kind of foundation on which something lasting could be built. She was going to spend the rest of her life surrounded by the evidence of her miscalculations without ever acknowledging them as such. That was its own consequence. Vivian did not need to add to it. Across the room, the Duchess looked up. Their eyes met briefly, directly, neither intending to look away first. A moment, too. Vivian inclined her head, the smallest acceptable acknowledgement. The Duchess held her gaze for one more second. Then she returned to her conversation. It was not forgiveness. Vivian was not in the business of offering what she did not feel. But it was a line drawn, a border established, a decision made that the anger would live in its proper place and not be permitted to consume more space than it deserved. She turned back to the room. Julian was at her elbow. "All right," he said quietly. Yes, she found entirely honest in this. Yes. He said nothing further. He had understood since September that there were things she processed in silence and things she processed aloud, and that the distinction mattered, and that his job in the first category was simply to be present without filling the space with words it didn't require. She had told him once that this was the thing she had missed most after her mother died, having someone to be silent with. He had understood immediately, She had not been surprised. Later, near midnight, when the party had thinned to its last remaining guests, and the servants were moving quietly through the rooms collecting glasses, Vivian found herself in the entrance hall. The marble floor, the chandelier burning low now, the candles in their later hours, the tall windows showing December darkness and just barely the reflection of the room itself, guests departing, footmen with coats, the soft collapse of a formal evening into its comfortable conclusion. She stood where she had stood in June. Not deliberately, she had simply ended up here, following the natural drift of the evening. But she recognized the spot. She had stood here with her one good dress and her quietest expectations, and a woman had been watching the drive, and she had not known any of it. She knew all of it now. Julian came to stand beside her. "Ready?" he said. She looked at the hall one last time. The chandelier and the marble and the tall windows and the space that had tried in June to establish what she was and was not entitled to. "Yes," she said. They walked up the main staircase together. She did not look back. She already knew where she stood, and it was finally, irrevocably above all of it. Somewhere in the county records of Berkshire, in a folder between two receipts for building work, there is a letter in a neat and somewhat formal hand. It has been there for 20 years. It begins, "I am not your enemy." It ends, "I am simply a man who knows something he would prefer not to know, and who is trying to find the arrangement that causes the least harm to the most people." Robert Voss never knew that his daughter would read it one day. She likes to think he would not have been surprised. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps more than you know. And before you go, tell us which city you're listening from.